Hi, I'm Ben Ferguson, and welcome to a special post-election AMAC Weekly News. First up, not only was the 2020 election absolutely unprecedented, but it led to some of the most shocking results in American history. I'm talking about voter turnout. How did this happen? We'll explain it in just a moment. Up next, American pollsters that have egg on their face after a second presidential election ended in an absolute failure on their part. Now, the question now is, are they doing this on purpose to try to influence the election outcome? I'll break that down for you in just a second. And finally, we are joined by AMAC's Bobby Charles to discuss the election and, most importantly, the impact it is going to have on you, an AMAC member. All that and more in just a second. Quick reminder, please make sure you share this video with your family and friends, as big tech seems to be limiting the news getting out from conservatives. Your AMAC Weekly News starts right now. If this week has proven anything at all, it's that the left figured out how to alter the way we vote for the presidency of the United States of America. And they were able to do it in a way that would work to their advantage in a massive way. Because of their actions, somehow a candidate who couldn't even get 500 people to a rally, much less bring any excitement for his campaign, I'm talking about Joe Biden, garnered more votes than any other president in American history. That's right. Joe Biden, the candidate no one in America was excited about voting for, got more votes than even Barack Obama, Ronald Reagan, George Bush, or Bill Clinton. So you have to ask the question, how in the world did he do this? And even more than that, how did he do it during a global pandemic? Well, we can explain that now. Back in March, when we knew basically nothing about the coronavirus, a man named Mark Elias began pushing for a vote-by-mail campaign in 2020 for the Democratic Party. Now, this lawyer is known because he not only represented Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign, but he was also identified as having hired Fusion GPS. Now, let me take a moment to remind you about Fusion GPS. Fusion GPS is the firm that hired former British spy Christopher Steele, who then fabricated the Steele dossier and started the entire investigation into, quote, Russian collusion in the 2016 election. You know, the whole thing that was made up. Well, in March and early April, we knew nothing about coronavirus, how it would impact our country, and most especially, how it would impact our election. Yet, the Democrats were thinking ahead. On April the 5th, 2020, think about how many months ago this is, Hillary Clinton got in on the action, retweeting a tweet from this lawyer, kicking off the entire liberal plan involving mail-in voting. Take a look at this tweet or retweet that Hillary Clinton put out. She said, states must take concrete steps now to make sure every citizen can be heard in November, no matter where we are by then in fighting the COVID-19 pandemic. This is months and months and months before an election. She's already tweeting this out. Well, the tweet below that was a tweet by this attorney. He stated his, quote, 5 rules for states to protect voting in person, which included providing adequate staffing at the polls, expanding curbside voting for all ages, allowing early voting and weekends as well. Vote anywhere rules. Yes, you heard me right. He actually tweeted out a vote anywhere rule, and creating systems for voters to vote at non-peak times to reduce the lines. Now, at this point, this lawyer began suing or pressuring battleground states, including Nevada and North Carolina, to increase the distribution of mail-in ballots on behalf of the Democratic Party, endorsed, obviously, in this idea by Hillary Clinton. And I'm assuming Joe Biden, right? Because this is a good thing for them. Liberals knew then that no matter what COVID did to our country, no matter how fast it might go away, they could use the opportunity to take advantage of this, well, election cycle. And that's exactly what they did. See, Democrats knew that when you start indiscriminately sending out ballots across the nation, you open up the door to, well, people filling out ballots for family members who weren't even planning on voting. And you didn't have to worry about identification. That's right, they made sure that you didn't even have to have signature verification in some swing states. Now, the left was determined to do anything in their power to take both chambers of Congress and the White House. In the middle of a pandemic, not only did they use their mail-in ballot scheme, but they also poured a record-breaking amount of money into congressional campaigns, like those against Senator Lindsey Graham and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. For example, Lindsey Graham's challenger became the first Senate candidate in American history to pass the $100 million mark for fundraising and spending. What makes this even better is that Election Day was an absolute bloodbath for liberals, even with their mail-in ballot schemes. All of the hundreds of millions of dollars were wasted, as both Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell kept their seats and the GOP remained in control of the Senate. Now, as for the presidential election, our president refuses to allow our country to be taken advantage of in this way, which is why he is fighting back in the courts as he should. Lawsuits have already been filed in Arizona because voters were instructed to use Sharpies, which rendered their ballots unreadable. Then the poll workers refused to give them new ballots to the people wanting to vote when the machines failed to process the vote in front of them. Also, the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, made this announcement in Pennsylvania on Wednesday. Take a look.
We have filed a lawsuit. The lawsuit actually required that when these mail-in ballots that you know are highly suspicious anyway, this form of balloting has always been considered the most prone to fraud. That's according to the New York Times when it didn't apply to candidate President Trump. Well, we were supposed to be allowed by law to observe the counting of the ballots. Now, observe means, to any intelligent person, being able to look at it. The way it's interpreted by the Democrat crooked machine of Philadelphia is that the observers can be 20 or 30 feet away, never able to see the ballot itself, never able to see if it was properly postmarked, properly addressed, properly signed on the outside.
Now, this corruption, to be very clear, is not new in Philadelphia or in Pennsylvania. Days before Election Day, Pennsylvania Attorney General Josh Shapiro literally tweeted this out, quote, "If all the votes are added up in Pennsylvania, Trump is going to lose. That's why he's working overtime to subtract as many votes as possible from this process. For the record, he's 0-6 against us in court. We've protected voting rights. Now ignore the noise and vote." Let's be clear about this. No votes have been counted, and the Attorney General was already tweeting that Trump was going to lose in the state. And let me be clear, this is just the beginning. We must fight for the future of our nation, and we must fight for our right to have a legitimate vote count. And it is absolutely okay and correct for Donald Trump and his legal team to do everything in their power legally to make sure that every vote is counted correctly, and any vote that was done in an improper way is thrown out. I want to take you back for a moment to 2016. Remember that election when everyone said that Donald Trump couldn't win, and sure enough, he did. Well, after the 2016 election, the future of polling as a profession came under extreme scrutiny. We watched as poll after poll emerged back in 2016, showing there was no way for President Trump to ever make it to the White House. Then reality set in. Donald Trump swept the nation with overwhelming numbers that showed the pollsters were just flat out wrong. So fast forward to 2020, and 2020 has now proved to be the final straw, I would argue, for the entire industry. Just last month, GOP pollster Frank Luntz warned that his profession had to get this election right or else. Take a look.
Well, I hate to acknowledge it because that's my industry, at least partially, but the public will have no faith, no confidence. Right now, the biggest issue is a trust deficit, and pollsters did not do a good job in 2016. So if Donald Trump surprises people, if Joe Biden's got a 5 or 6 point lead and then Donald Trump wins, my profession is done. It's finished because nobody will ever trust. You can make a mistake once, Brett. You cannot make it again.
Now, Frank Luntz is 100% correct in what he just had to say. The American people, and especially Trump supporters, do not trust the polls, and they especially do not trust pollsters. We know for a fact that the polls influence public sentiment in election seasons, whether they're right or they're wrong. That is why so many mainstream media pollsters push so hard to say that the president was, of course, behind in this election, that there's no way he could win again. Everybody hates the president, right? He's the orange man that we're all supposed to want to vote against. Well, guess what happened? They got it wrong. And it is because of this that Luntz offered up this apology to Trump's personal pollster as election results started rolling in this week.
Frankly, and I want to do this publicly, I owe an apology to John McLaughlin, who is Donald Trump's pollster. He reported privately that Trump was leading in all these swing states by roughly a point, maybe 2 points. And in the end, even if Biden wins those states, John was closer than any of these heralded published polls that we see in the New York Times and the Washington Post and CNN. And in the end, we have to believe in accountability in the polling profession, in the political profession, even in yours, in the media profession. The public has the right to accountability, and we have the responsibility to deliver it.
Now, as a reminder, in 2016, the pollsters came out saying, hey, this was just a weird election, right? It was a fluke. There was an X factor here. It'll never happen again. And then they said, we'll just move on. Well, they believe they could just coast through the 2020 election on the claims that 2016 was really just an asterisk, guys. It was such a weird election. We had this guy that wasn't a politician, Donald Trump, running. How could we have possibly gotten it right? Well, they didn't get it right then, and they didn't get it right in 2020 either. So they can no longer make this claim that it was just an X factor, a mistake. In fact, I want to be clear what this actually was. What the pollsters did in 2016, and clearly what they did in 2020, was nothing more than an attempt to intentionally change the narrative and the sentiment across the nation. The far-left pollsters belonging to the mainstream media, who are paid for by the mainstream media, they believe they could actually trick people to vote for Joe Biden. This is how dumb the left thinks the American people are, or maybe just how little respect they actually have for the voter. Now, the polling profession could finally have, well, reached its inevitable end, and I say good. We cannot back down from this fight against these people on the left. And look, most importantly, what happened is polls do have influence. When you constantly are showing that a candidate is going to lose, there are people that will probably say, I don't know why I would show up. I don't know why I would vote. They're telling me that it's not going to matter anyway. This is exactly why we need to make sure that we remind everyone moving forward, the polls are not to be believed. No matter what they tell you, no matter what they say, these pollsters are clearly in the bank for the left and the Democratic Party. And that is exactly why in future elections, we should pay no attention to what any of these people have to say, because all they're doing is acting as if they are somehow, well, I guess a newspaper, a polling company that tells you that whoever it is that you like on the right has no chance to ever win. And they were wrong again this year. It is an unprecedented election in multiple ways, from voter turnout to now legal issues that we're having, and it may be days and days before we actually know what the final outcome is. Joining me now to talk about this is the national spokesman for AMAC, Bobby Charles. Bobby, I appreciate you coming on. I want to talk big picture for a moment here. There are people, obviously, in the media that are saying that Donald Trump is a sore loser. Let's be clear. The president has an obligation, a right, and a duty to all American voters to make sure that this vote is done the correct way. The only thing that the Trump legal team has been saying over and over again is they want to make sure that every legitimate vote is counted. And any vote that was not counted in the legitimate manner for which the election is being run, state by state, is not counted. I have no idea why the media would be against this, except I think they're afraid that maybe a lot of votes could be thrown out in some certain states that are extremely important. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think to take the big picture for a minute, Ben, our founding fathers were very insightful and foresightful. They recognized that there are times when the political process will find itself at loggerheads. In fact, it happened even in their day with Jefferson's election. And we're at a moment right now where the political process has brought us to something of an impasse that I think will actually last weeks, not days. And but it's not that it won't be resolved. We have an independent judiciary, and as you indicated, in at least 6 states, there are legal actions unfolding that range broadly from making sure that every vote is counted, every legal vote is counted, that illegal votes or votes that come from, for example, outside the state are not being counted, making sure that votes that show up in the middle of the night somehow magically are not counted, making sure that we don't have more votes being recorded than there are registered voters in a state, et cetera. The way that this will unfold is that there are individual state processes for double checking, triple checking what is being done. And then ultimately there are appeals directly to the federal judiciary and up to the Supreme Court to identify whether or not there are systemic problems, constitutional problems with the way things unfold. I want to just add a note of hope together with realism. Let me say, obviously, we don't know yet where this will all come out, but I see multiple ways that the current president, Trump, could prevail in this situation, and we're just going to have to wait and see how that unfolds. I also want to say that...
Well, let me jump in here real quick, because there's something that you mentioned a moment ago, and that was about voters, making sure that voters didn't vote in a state for which they no longer live. And that goes back to 2 states that are so important, Arizona and Nevada. We do know that there are legitimate concerns and red flags that have been thrown up where there are hospitality workers, many who are laid off due to COVID-19 at casinos and resorts in Nevada and in Arizona that went back to other states, right, even maybe switching states from Arizona to Nevada, who then voted in an election which they were not eligible to vote in. Many of these voters, by the way, would probably be union voters, which swing overwhelmingly for Joe Biden if you are in these industries. It is why Joe Biden spent time and Democrats spent millions and millions of dollars focusing on this voting block of hospitality workers in these 2 states. And that is one of the reasons why you're seeing the legal battle there, which is a good thing.
Yeah, so let me add an additional layer of understanding, and you're exactly right, Ben, in how you just described it. One of the things you're also seeing is that there are, I'm not even gonna call it fraud. I'm gonna call it fundamental misunderstandings that occur where someone either votes in the wrong state for which they have they have the right to vote, but they don't have the right to vote in the wrong state or in 2 states or to vote twice. And I think another thing that's happening in this election cycle, which you're going to see in multiple states, I believe, is that you're going to find that people looked for an insurance policy. They sent in an absentee ballot or a mail-in ballot, or they were canvassed and their ballots were harvested. And then all of a sudden they were worried. And so they went and they voted on the day of again. And I think one of the things you're going to find is that there are ballots thrown out. And that's probably why in places like Wisconsin, you end up with more votes recorded than there are registered voters, because people were worried. And, sometimes software picks that up and sometimes it doesn't. Let me add 2 other very short points. One is that we elect people to do good things. We also elect people to prevent bad things from happening. And one of the good news stories out of this is that the United States Senate, with wins by Collins and others flipping a couple of races, one of the things we think pretty clearly now is that we will have control, the Republicans will have control of the Senate by maybe 53, 54. If that happens, what we will not see, therefore, is court packing. We will not see a lot of the bad things, even if Biden were to prevail. The other thing I think people need to remember is there's tremendous Trump energy out there right now. And what that means is that 2 years from now, which seems a long way away, but is really right around the corner, you will see a lot of motivated young Republicans running for the U.S. House, also running at the state level. And I wouldn't be at all surprised to see the House flip in 2 years. We gain more Senate seats in 2 years, and God willing, we have a Republican president at that time too. But even if we didn't, we are in fact going to prevent some of this socialist really dangerous socialist activity. Doesn't mean that we're going to be safe. We're not. We've got China breathing down our backs and a lot of other things. But, I try to be a combination of hopeful and realistic. And I know that's...
if there's any takeaway for me, and quickly in about 20 seconds, I want your reaction. The pickups that we had in the House side, the pollsters were wrong. They said we were going to lose 12 to 15 seats in the House. We actually went the complete opposite direction of that and picked up seats in the House. It was almost a 20 to 25 vote turnaround from what the pollsters said, differential. It's incredible. But almost all of the successes that we had at flipping Democrat seats to Republican seats in the House were done with minority candidates and women candidates, which means Donald Trump has really made this tent bigger. We're no longer the party of old white men, as so many people have criticized. We ran minority candidates and female candidates, and they had huge successes at flipping these Democratic districts to Republican, and that's something that should not be overshadowed. That is a massive victory for the Republican Party, and no other president's been able to do that but Donald Trump.
Actually, right you are. And the parallel that comes closest is 1984 with Ronald Reagan, who did realign blue-collar workers, traditionally Democrats, behind the Republican Party. He also pulled not as many as Donald Trump, but he did pull an increase in both Black and Hispanic voters. So end of the day, what you're seeing right now is a realignment behind the Republican Party of populations that the Democrats have felt that they owned. And I think that's very interesting, because what it means is that there's a truth behind all this. There's a deep truth behind the things that both Ronald Reagan, who I work for, and Donald Trump are speaking. And we need to remember those truths.
No doubt. And Bobby, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for coming on. And I promise this conversation is far from over.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ben.
Big thank you to our team here at AMAC for all that they've done to get this special edition of your AMAC Weekly News out. Also, a quick reminder, make sure you share this in your timeline. Unfortunately, conservative voices have been suppressed by big tech, and we want to make sure that we get this show out to the masses. So thank you for sharing this. Lastly, if you have not joined AMAC or renewed your membership, it is important now, more than ever, that you're a member and that we are fighting on behalf of the entire membership group. All you got to do is go to that website at the bottom of the screen and renew or join AMAC right now. I'm Ben Ferguson, and I'll see you back next week for our next episode.